Great establishing shot. The constant rooftops. And Amane Suzuha. Hey. The real Amane Suzuha behind the mask. That cheery persona. Kind of looks like a gear. A pendant, a trinket. That's the other persona. That smile on your face though. This should be interesting. Okay then. And the location is out there now. Whoa. Oh. Combat stance. Oh, this is bad. Ooh, look at this. Almost kind of felt like, oh my god, this is my chance. And she kind of did the, the back and forth. It's a bit more than that. Punished Amane Suzuha. Listen, folks, I mean, it's not subtle anymore, is it? I mean, it hasn't been subtle for some time now. That's a time traveler. And right there, I saw the curse of being a time traveler as well, I think. Because Makise Kurisu is, I mean, she's always been integral, that's been clear since episode 1. But yeah, Suzuha clocking her, it's almost as if it was instincts, right? And that, once again, it continues that trend of her slipping up. She could control herself there. But the curse of time travel, or being a time traveler, being that, you have certain knowledge, specific knowledge ahead of time about people, in this case, Makise, I suppose. Yeah, things just got even more bit my tongue. Interesting. I mean, she did say she's a full-fledged warrior. Combat stance at the ready. But I also noticed that she just kind of lights up the moment she sees Okarin, right? That smile, that was a legitimate smile. After I saw her inside just deflated, depressed. Triple XL. Did she just kind of finish a reference for Daru? I didn't understand the reference, but... Yup. Hold on, brother. Yeah, give him a second. Out of context, that's going to be... I mean, even I don't know the true context of that joke, but... Look at this. Yeah. Quick look. Oh, yeah. Oh. If this is John Teeter, she might be speaking of her grandpa. Oh, this could be our John Teeter. Maybe not yet. Ooh. Anything yet? Oh. I mean, that much was clear enough from her reaction, but... Whoa. Oh, look at that combat stance. Air raid. Yeah, she's a time traveler, but now it's all about, is she John Teeter? Another person. But I'm glad.
同じ環境で育ちながらどうしてこう社会性がなくなっちゃったんだか。
マイリは昔から
this guy.
あなたに言ってるの。
ガシッと俺の目に狂いはなかった。お前は最
Careful about being hands-on.
何を急に気持ち悪い。
Yeah.
白衣やはり研究機関において白衣こそがユニフォーム。
Kind of like a uniform and a shield even.
腹が減ったのか。
うるさいな。お昼から何も食べてない。
Listen, she likes being here. And these two have much in common.
買い置きのカップ麺ならあるがいらないというのか。やはりアメリカ育ちは。
カップ麺。カップ麺もらうわ。
Okay.
味は何があるの。
醤油と塩だ。
That smile.
塩味。それとフォークも。
The hybrid. Instead of chopsticks, I suppose.
早くしないと時間切れで負けになるわよ。
Interesting cut.
諦めたらどうせその端にあるのがウイルス。
Is that the same game?
バレバレよ。はい、私の勝ち。
Listen, she might be a genius, but
岡部は対極的視点に欠けていると言わざるを得ないわね。考えているのはいつも自分の作戦のことだけ。相手がどう考えているとか罠があるかもなんて全く考えてない。
that's a good read.
何よ。
Oh.
なんと言った。
対極的視点に欠けていると言った。事実でしょ。
Oh.
お前だ。
Okay, Ocarine.
岡部と言った。
Calm down a bit.
だ
Oh,
から
okay.
何よ。
違う。
Oh, look at that.
何度言えばわかる。クリスティーナ。法院。もしくは京馬と呼ぶ。
Again, instincts. That was like a almost muscle memory. Yeah, that affected her. Oh, yeah. She's been in that situation before.
泣いているのか。
泣いてないわよ。男の人に怖い顔で迫られて恐怖を感じたとか、その後ほっとして涙が出たとか、そういうこと全然ないし。
助手はなんで泣いているのだ。
今本人
Yeah.
が説明したわけだが
Abusive father, possibly? Could he be an absolute piece of shit? Other abusive relationships?
でこいつがあるってことはこれでこう
Come on, Ocarine, you should have apologized.
家族に連絡しなくていいのか。
母はアメリカ。父とは7年会ってない。
7
連
years.
絡の必要なし。
まだ何も見てないよ
Oh boy.
ただ Z
Strap in.
プログラムが出てきて
Z program.
1973年
Ooh,
と書いてある。
2 years before the IBN 5100.
設立は
1954年。
IBN5100 が作られたのは。
1975年
きっと陰謀なんか全く関係ない。
Oh boy, this is Pandora's box right here.
とかなんかでしょうから。言い換えれば過去から未来までを含む理想郷の実現。
Utopia,
それ
eh?
は21世紀に向けての
That's a matter of perspective.
理想郷。ディストピア。
Z プログラムでは高エネルギーの陽子衝突
Spatial
を用いた
temporal
時空転移実験。
Transferal. Oh.
時空
Oh, that's
転移。
time travel.
タイムトラベルではないか。
嘘。
And the collider comes into play as well then.
40年も前からタイムトラベルについて研究を行ってきたのだ。
プログラム第1段階大型波動
Collider?
の建設
Oh,
実用
wow.
化プログラム第2段階リフターの実用化および調整
Lifter.
リフトなんだ。
I'm not sure, to be honest.
つまりブラックホールとリフターの力を利用する
Episode 3.
プログラム第3段階動物実験プログラム第4段階
Humans.
人体実験
Human is dead.
Mismatch. Jellyman's report.
詳細はゼリーマンズレポートを参照
Who the hell is
見
Jellyman?
ることはできるか。
できるとは思うけどまずくねこ
Interesting.
れ事実だとしたらマジ国家機密級だ
This is a before and after situation right here, folks.
お前はもう帰れ。ここから先を知ったら
Ah.
危険にさらされる可能性がある。お前は将来を有望視された天才だろう。
Look at
もし
this.
かして心配してくれ
Of
ている
course, yeah. I
当
mean,
たり前だ。お前は俺の助手なのだからな。
そりゃどうもでも帰らないわよ
yeah, no one's going to step away from this now.
後悔しないな。
しない
ダルはどうする。わかった。
Pandora's box, man.
これよりゼリーマンズレポートの解析に入る。
ゼリーマンズレポート10被験者ジェームス・
James
マッカーシー
McCarthy.
出身アメリカ実験日2005
Whoa, that's strange, man. That's my birthday.
Z プログラム4実験結果ヒューマンイズデッドミスマッチ
Orphan.
超重力による無限圧縮およびカーブラックホール内の特異点通過に
Kerr black hole, right? And that's meant to be like a rotating
そうみたいね。あ、日付。
21. Holy shit.
1921年4月3日。
身元不明の男性の死体は全身がブヨブヨ
Jellyman.
ゼリー状になっていた。
Oh my god, that's fucked up, man. Gelmans.
なんだこれ。
完全ではないにしろタイムトラベルに成功してるってこと。
日本の新聞か。
1936年
Gelatin
5月
man.
24日、京都比叡山山麓で遺体発見される。
This is a bit too close to home, isn't it?
まだ見る。
いやもう十分だ。
Oh.
オカリン。
Yeah, this got a little too real, didn't it, Okarin?
けど、どうしてゼリー状になるん？
これまで
Jellyman.
推測するにセレンはカーブラックホールを使ってタイムトラベルの技術を開発している。
And John Teeter told me in episode 3.
10のマイナス24乗キロの質量を10のマイナス
It's an abnormal compression.
押し込んで過去に送るわけ。この穴にこのスポンジを通そうとするようなものよ。だから中身がスカスカになる。
The dawn of a new era, perhaps.
どうするつもり？
Yeah, that shook him up. Because it became a little too real.
ショックなのはわかる。
For him and his friends, I
してし
think.
まった以上何らかの結論は出さなきゃ。岡部、
This is him forcing himself, isn't it?
結論決まっているだろう。こっちには未来ガジェット8号電話レンジカッコ仮があるのだ。先に完璧なタイム
Yeah,
マシ
you
ン
do.
を作り出しセルンを出し抜く。そして世界の支配構造を作り変えるのだ。
God damn it. It gets me every single time, man. Okay, so that's episode 5 of Steins Gate. And yeah, that brings up 5 episodes total, right? The first 5, rather. And yeah, I've got to say, I think it's a strong opening 5 episode run. It really is, I think, at least. I've thoroughly enjoyed all of these episodes, and I think it gave me more than enough, even episodes ago. But here, 5 episodes in, you really truly know the flow of the story, the flow of the characters of the story, the storytelling techniques being utilized here. Right, the structure of it, the visual and cinematic language of the whole thing as well. I mean, listen, as you know, for me, one episode was more than enough. Hell, even before episode 1 ended, I knew, this is for me. It just is, right? So I've been excited since then. And, I can already tell you 5 episodes in that I really thoroughly care about these characters and these character dynamics and these interpersonal relationships that are being formed and have existed for years, for some of them at least. And yeah, like I've said on a few occasions at this point, I really, really enjoy spending time with all of these characters. I do. And listen, I know it's early days, but I'm already kind of, dreading the conclusion of the series, because again, I've taken to it so much that just the idea of having to say goodbye at some point, it's already kind of creeping in. Maybe this is just a me thing, but it happens to me a lot with things I really like and take to, right? It's just something I cannot get out of my mind. It's, it just, the moment I know I'm really enjoying something and I'm really, really into something, that idea just kind of goes hand in hand, because immediately I also start thinking about the ending of it, that it is going to end, that that my time with, the characters and the story itself is limited. But yeah, let's actually kind of get into the episode itself. It's a strong episode. It felt like quite an important episode. I mean, like I said, the story's been at play since episode 1, since, the first few seconds of the story, right? Time travel, narrative, and all of that. But yeah, here in episode 5, it has taken a major step. I called it Pandora's box, before and after. The stakes. I mean, I knew the stakes, right? As, again, an audience member and dramatic irony and all of that. But now the stakes have been established, right? Or at least the beginning stages of it. I mean, more than the beginning stages of it. They've been established for the characters, for the players in the story, right? Ocarine specifically is the major focus here, right? Because it shook him up. It did a number on him, actually. And, he had to step out of there. Because, like I said, it's clear that it got a little too real, a little too close to home, right? And, this is someone who cares about people, right? He's really rather unique, right? He can be bizarre from time to time, but this is someone, and I've kind of explored this episodes ago, below this Hyohin Kiyoma persona of his, mad scientist persona of his, and all of that, the role playing, there is someone who is kind, there is someone who cares about people. And yeah, as they are going through Jellyman's report, it keeps escalating to the point that he's beginning to really truly understand that, okay, something really risky and dangerous has actually kind of fallen into his lap. I brought up that point a couple of episodes ago, right? There's always this role playing and all of that, right? But then ultimately it did kind of fall into his lap, and now he really truly gets to see that, okay, it's real. Now it's getting a little too real, and I need to really kind of take a step back and think about this, right? How it could affect me, but even before that, how it can affect the people he really cares about, be it people like Daru, be it people like Mayuri, be it people like Magise Kurisu, who he does care about quite a bit. And the thing that's really kind of interesting to see here is that now Makise also understands that, okay, he does care about me, right? Yes, there's a lot of goofy moments, there's a lot of fun moments, but there's serious moments as well. And of course, Makise kind of gets to see that serious side of Kiyoma or Okerin or Okabe a couple of episodes ago as well, or maybe the last episode, right? She does see glimpses of Okerin's perceptive, serious side. And, again, I made the point that she understands that, this is a competent person as well, in addition to, all the stuff that he brings with, his persona, his character, his role playing and all of that. But here she also gets to, understand, or at least in the beginning stages of it, that, okay, he does kind of care for me, right? He's concerned about me. Yes, Ocarine almost said it, but then, you see he kind of plays it off. It's because you're my assistant and all of that. Right? Early stages, but of course he's taken to Makise, right? There's hints of that back in episode 2, even the ending of episode 1, and even episode 1 itself, there it already kind of felt like, okay, are these the star-crossed lovers? But yeah, Ocarine is rattled. It truly is. And the thing is, I maybe I might get it in the upcoming episodes, but it would have been cool to see a bit of internal monologue, right? How Ocarine is, kind of trying to tackle this internally, right? But, maybe I should hold my horses. Again, only 5 episodes in, so I might get something like that, a major focus on Okarine's internal thoughts. Because, there's a lot of things that Ocarine still hasn't really thought about, or he has, but, I haven't really seen it or experienced it as an audience member, especially one of the biggest components of this, this idea of him remembering stuff that happened, but no one else seems to remember, right? Again, that idea of his memory not being reconstructed, but everyone else's memory has been reconstructed after, he had his moments back in episode 1, right? Switched over to a different timeline, to a different world line. And yeah, I'd say it's a little bit surprising that, they haven't shown me Ocarine actually really tackling that. Though, of course, you can kind of look at it as Ocarine being a little bit scared about the whole thing, right? Almost kind of like out of sight, out of mind, just try to forget about all that, That's a possibility as well. But sooner or later, he'll have to face that. And again, more so than just facing it, it might actually become really crucial, right? That he openly explores it, with the rest of them as well. Once it kind of gets to that point, and there's much more understanding for, the idea of, memory reconstruction and all of that. And, the crazy thing is, this isn't even the timeline or the world line that I started with, right? If you go back to the first half of episode 1, that's how the story opens, right? But I've spent, again, 4.5 episodes in this timeline at this point. I think I just kind of have to be a little bit patient, because I'll be going back to that at some point. Again, given the things I saw in episode 1, the things that are at play, and the characters that appear to be at play in episode 1, and the things that they have to say and all of that, yeah, I'll be going back to that at some point. But yeah, circling back to the rooftop moment in the conclusion there, I really liked the color design there. I did. Like I said, there's this distinct feeling of the dawn of a new era, right? Like I said, there's a before and after. And yeah, even though Okarin is rattled, and I'm hoping I get to see some of those internal thoughts at some point soon, hopefully, how he potentially could be placing his loved ones and the people he really truly cares about the most in this life at risk. You see that he does his thing, right? Especially once Makise shows up on the roof, and there he felt that, okay, now I truly kind of have to put that mask back on and kind of show her that I'm all in. I'm not concerned, even though he is, right? Because that's the normal thing to feel at that point, right? Concern. He kind of doubles down and goes all in, right? Hyohin Kiyoma, right? Challenge accepted world. And of course, the voice acting is just top notch all around. But here you really do have to point out the voice actor for Okarin. Again, it's one of the standout performances in this episode, and then right there, in the conclusion, the laugh, that the laugh is just so iconic, isn't it? I've experienced it back in Death Note as well, the same actor, but there's just something, I don't know, man, there's something about it, no one else does it like him. I mean, it just feels so raw and authentic, doesn't it? But again, that's just one component of it that really kind of stood out in the conclusion there. And he goes really big this time as well, right? I've brought up this idea of kind of like, you're not this person, but this idea of faking it till you make it, protecting yourself, really kind of leading into that persona, embracing that persona, because that's the thing that's going to allow you to, take that step, even though you have a lot of concern, even though you might be afraid, right? At that moment, he knew he needs his shield, and that's his shield, right? That's his mask. And listen, this is not just exclusive to Okarin. I've seen, this idea of, a contradiction between, characterization and true character that applies to a couple of these characters at this point, be it Makise, be it, again, Okarin, be it Amane Suzaha, right? The thing is, Daru and Mayuri are Daru and Mayuri. They are who they are. And of course, this idea of true character slipping through, right? Shining through. It's been at play for a few episodes now. As I get to learn more about Makise, as I get to learn more about Amane Suzaha, right? This is a big episode for Amane Suzaha. And of course, through some of those rare moments by herself, as I get to see the true Amane Suzaha, now, this idea of the ethics of time travel begin to come in as well, right? Just this notion of being a time traveler and how, lonely and frustrating it can be, right? The curse of being a time traveler, as I called it earlier. And Amane Suzaha is a young person. I mean, yes, this is a young person that is quite a hardened young person, given, the future she comes from, right? Full-fledged warrior, who speaks of air raids and, brings up things like death reports, and, barely kind of knows about fireworks and corn, actual corn, real corn, and not corn in a can. This is someone who's certainly tough and someone who's been forced to toughen up, essentially, given, the future she comes from. But still, that's a young person, man. That shot of her in the opening, right? Again, a beautiful establishing shot, the rooftops, it begins on the rooftop and it ends on a rooftop. That's a bit of a constant, isn't it? The rooftops in this anime, in the story. But yeah, she cuts an isolated figure just sitting there. I've seen this a few times now. The last time I saw her just kind of channel surfing, again, of course, looking at the report about the crashed satellite, right, in the side of the building. How about that for similarities, right? I saw a gentleman sticking out from the side of a building, right? Much like that satellite. But again, I'm using the term they're using at this point, the satellite. But ultimately, it's essentially, right, most likely the time-traveling machine that I also saw in episode 1 on the rooftop, right? But there, it's a proper landing.
So yeah, I think, you know, this episode really kind of allows you to almost kind of confirm a few things, right? It doesn't make it official, but there's so much there that, like I said, it's not subtle anymore, right? It hasn't been subtle. And, you know, for that reason, I don't think, you know, it's meant to be some kind of major revelation, you know, at least in the presentation of all of these things. Because it's been clear for some time now that Amane Suzaha is a time traveler. And the thing that this not so subtle approach allows is that, okay, you know, through her slip ups, I suppose, and the things that she has to say, you know, again, be it, fireworks. Yeah, I think I've heard those. And again, being excited for those to the point that, you know, she ends up taking photos and sends her first email and all of that, right? To Okarin. And again, you know, speaking of air raids and actually reacting to certain things, almost as if, again, for her, you know, it's this trauma. These reactions, you know, things like air raids and death reports, to see someone so young, kind of being used to all of that, you know, it's sad, isn't it? But it's also, you know, this insight, you know, these little peeks at how this dystopian future is, you know, through her behavior, through the things that she has to say. And yeah, you know, again, her reaction to Makise Kurisu being quite a distinct one, right? For the story as a whole, and Makise Kurisu's role in the story, or at least in this timeline, in this world line. And you know, the crazy thing is, she's had the most run-ins with Okarin, and again, that's by design. You know, she clearly knows Okarin, and who he is and the things he's meant to do. And anytime she sees Okarin, she's got this smile on her face. She's just happy to see him be around Okarin. So yeah, I'm sure I'll, you know, get to learn more about that as well. You know, that dynamic. And hell, you know, I think I've floated that idea before. That could be, you know, Suzaha and Okarin actually showing up together, right? In that machine, in the time machine. And I'm speaking of the other Okarin. The one, you know, that screams out in agony in the halls of the radio building. And again, that sends our Okarin for, I don't know, answers. And again, he comes across the dead Makise Kurisu, the one that's been stabbed. And then, of course, you know, the other method being the mind travel, right? It's been a long time since I've used that term. Again, you know, coined back in the day, a couple of decades ago at this point, in Lost, right? And, you know, the crazy thing is, Okarin reminds me so much of another character that I just adore. One of my favorite characters from Lost, and maybe even just altogether. And for my fellow Lost fans, yeah, I'm sure you understand who I'm speaking of at this point. So, you know, the fact that I'm reminded of that character through Okarin, right? A little bit at least. The similarities are there. It just, you know, helps me kind of connect even more with Okarin, you know? You know, the thing is, I'll probably have to bring in some Lost talk at some point, maybe even in this episode. You know, maybe I'll give a spoiler warning. But yeah, there's some really interesting and exciting stuff that feels quite similar, or I can draw from at least. I feel that it's always good to draw from other time travel narratives as well, you know? But yeah, you know, I'll kind of come back to the shenanigans going on in episode 1's timeline, you know, the first half of episode 1, at least in the radio building. But going back to my initial point about Okarin getting to experience all of these slip-ups and just kind of getting to know Suzaha the most, and, you know, just kind of being a little bit baffled or a little bit confused by the things she'll say and react to. You know, you see that ultimately he just accepted Suzaha for who she is, right? He doesn't kind of look beyond, okay, this is really rather odd. This is kind of strange. You know, she's saying things that are not making sense at all. But, you know, ultimately, it registers as odd, but not that odd. Again, Okarin himself really kind of being into the whole, you know, role-playing aspect of it, right? So he just kind of accepted her. So to me, it's not really actually a frustrating thing here. You know, I'm not sitting here thinking, oh, come on, Okarin, you should be figuring this out. You should be thinking that, okay, there's something off about her. Off to the point that, okay, you know, this is kind of beginning to almost sound like a time traveler, right? Even though, you know, that'd be a bit of a bridge too far anyways, I think, even though he himself has experienced something rather incredible already, right, in terms of maintaining his memories from the other timeline. He just kind of accepted her, and ultimately that is who Okabe is, That is Okabe Rintaro. Okarin accepts people for who they are, right? It's a really charming trait. Someone like Suzuha is kind of similar to someone like Ferris, right? If you look at it from Okarin's perspective. So he just accepted her, right? And he's just going with the flow, right? The whole, role-playing aspect of it. He's on board, essentially. But, kind of going back to that idea of this charming trait of his, I do believe that's one of the reasons, or that might be one of the main reasons so many people are kind of drawn to Okarin as well. Actually, if I think about it, maybe there is a bit more than just two, methods of time traveling in the series already. See, the thing is, the Okarin thing is rather unique. It's unique just to Okarin, as far as I know, right? So even, the revelations of CERN's time travel, as far as I know, they didn't cross any world lines or anything. This is all happening within this timeline, right? So they essentially, on a much, much larger scale, of course, executed time travel, time travel of humans even. Again, it's not perfect, but, they did it. These, jellymen or, gelmans, as I called them, they do end up showing up in these random places, right? Years and decades ago. And just that idea right there, it's this incredibly mind-blowing confirmation for people like Okarin and Daru, right? Who've been, seeing these bananas in this state for some time now, right? It gives them some incredible context, or at least an incredible comparison, right? And again, quite a jaw-dropping one in the sense that, okay, ours are, just bananas, but over there at CERN, they've been dealing with human lives, human bodies, right? Turning into that state. So that right there is quite the mindfuck for, again, Okarin and Daru, but again, Makise as well, because she understands and knows about the whole, Jalmana's aspect of it at this point. She's been around long enough. So ultimately, it appears that something similar is at play here on a smaller scale, right? And I'm speaking of the lab, right? And again, the phone microwave and the capabilities of it, right? It's happening. It appears that almost the same thing is happening, but on a smaller scale. But then, if that is the case, you have to kind of begin to go into the possibilities of an even smaller black hole being present, within that lab, or is being created, or something is facilitating that. And saying it out loud just kind of sounds absurd. But yeah, it is something similar, isn't it? That's allowing it. But more on that in a bit. Let me kind of focus on the different methods of time travel. So, Okarin's, I think, is unique, unless, the story tells me otherwise at some point. Him not having his memory rewritten or reconstructed, rather. He can just kind of, mind travel, as I called it a little bit earlier. So there's that. Then, of course, I've seen the messages that get sent back in time. Sometimes they get split up, as I saw in episode 1, the message got split up, but then other times it doesn't get split up. And then again, in this episode, there's confirmation of CERN's own brand of time travel, though, of course, it's rather similar to the phone microwave in terms of, the jellification, I suppose, of, juicy tenders. Or maybe juicy tenders didn't actually jellify. I don't know if that's not really important, but the bananas, that's been a constant, right? I've seen that on display. So different scales, but something rather similar is being facilitated in terms of time travel. But yeah, man, human is dead, mismatch. I asked the question, how the hell did they even select these people, or how they selected them, rather? There's 14 reports in total. I saw just a handful of them, even less than a handful of them. So is there a chance, there could be, out of those 14, there could be a report that's, I don't know, a bit too close to home for one of these characters, possibly, right? They only looked at a few, and then, Okarin felt that they've had enough, or he's had enough at least, for now. But, ultimately, I'm sure they'll just go back and look at the rest anyways. But yeah, in terms of people being selected for this or people applying to be a candidate for this, it's just, yeah, it's a bit of a head scratcher, right? Is it a case of, okay, the promise of being one of the first few, right? A pioneer in time travel research, right? Kind of almost understanding the potential risks of putting yourself in this position, right? That there's a possibility that you could die on this. But, again, the idea of, again, being one of the pioneers of time travel research and actual testing and experimentation, the notion of that, the idea of that might be a bit too much to overlook, right? Or are these people being forced? That's another really strong possibility. But even if you look at step number 3, animal experiments, there's no confirmation here that, those ended up being successful. There's every chance that those animals also ended up being jellified, right? Yet they still move on to human experiments anyways, as if all of a sudden now, through human experimentation, they'll just hit the right spot. But if you do go to the human experiments and, the dates and all of that, now you're kind of beginning to get into this idea of the past informing the future, right? This idea of, articles from 1921 and other, dates that have already passed, right? Yet you have these jelly humans ending up there in articles and all of that. But then again, another important question that comes out of this is that do they actually have control over it, right? I mean, it doesn't appear that they do. And by control, I mean, control over the specific time frame or time period and all of that, right? Did they have control over that person actually going to 1921, right? I don't think so. It doesn't appear that they did at that point, at least. But yeah, now I kind of want to shift the focus to the ethics of time travel, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, right? The curse of time travel and all of that, the responsibility of time travel. And, through Suzuha, as I refer to her as punished Suzuha, you see, again, she cuts quite the isolated figure, lonely and frustrated. And again, disappointed as well in herself. She ultimately ends up apologizing to Okarin a little bit later on about her behavior, right? Because again, it was instincts. Because ultimately, for Suzuha, it's really quite a visceral thing, isn't it? To see Makise Kurisu. Again, I don't know the actual reasoning for it, but yeah, based on Suzuha's reaction and the dystopian future she comes from, yeah, man, it's quite concerning. Like I said, this is bad, because ultimately it appears that Makise Kurisu ends up being responsible for something, right? Something bad, clearly from the looks of it, be it her being caught up in something or her kind of doing something by choice. And Suzuha even mentions, right, she doesn't know anything yet. But, if you're going to go down that route by the end of this episode, yeah, Pandora's box has been opened. She knows quite a bit, right? But I'm sure it means more so than just the information they got out of those reports. But, that's the opening phase, isn't it? So even though Suzuha has that reaction, again, quite a visceral and damning reaction to Makise Kurisu. I mean, to the point that she's shaking at one point, Suzuha that is, and then, she kind of has that double take, oh, this could be my chance, but ultimately she retreats or she gives up on that whole thing, right? And then you see one more shot of her inside, again, cutting an isolated figure and really rather disappointed as well at that point. Again, it could be a number of things, right? Her actually being disappointed that she almost maybe did something to Makise Kurisu, right? Even though this person that stands in front of her doesn't actually know anything yet or hasn't done anything yet, right? So, this is the idea of the ethics of time travel, right? And the curse of time travel. But yeah, in terms of the ethical conundrums of time travel or the ethics of time travel, yeah, I'm sure at some point, it's going to really, really kind of focus on that. Again, I kind of want to tippy toe around Lost and that character I keep kind of bringing up here. But yeah, Okarin he'll be in much, much tougher positions at some point. This is just early days and it's already getting a little too real, isn't it? for Okarin, but at some point he'll find himself in such incredibly difficult positions that, yeah, it'll test him. It'll probably break him at some point, right? And he'll have to kind of, pick himself up. But yeah, man, time travel, there is just a lot of baggage. There just is, as far as, the ethical conundrums of it and the ethics of it. And again, the psychological impact that I am seeing on display now through Amane Suzuha, right? But if you go a little bit deeper, the moral issues that arise, right? Is it morally permissible to insert yourself to change the flow of time? And then, of course, from that point on, depending on the answer, and, for example, in this case, let's say it is morally permissible, perhaps, to change certain things, then does it become an obligation, right? Is it obligatory, right? Social responsibility and all of that. But then there's also that idea of making a specific choice, deciding that one timeline of events is better than another, right? And then that can be subjective as well. And then, of course, in a narrative, the idea of all of that just kind of going out the window because it becomes personal. Because once it becomes too personal, right? And, it can kind of become a matter of life and death and all of that. Then you have characters that might be thinking, to hell with the ethics of it all, right? I only care about setting this straight or setting this right, or, fixing this mistake or fixing this timeline or fixing, my wrongs and all of that, right? And I'm sure I'll be getting some of that for sure, or maybe even a lot of that, right? It's kind of a staple of time travel narratives, isn't it? But then there's also room for, other ethical theories such as consequentialism, right? Big picture stuff. And then, of course, there's always the idea of the butterfly effect and, this notion that efforts to prevent tragedies could actually lead to new ones, could result in causing new ones, right? But then also, that could prevent other events from occurring altogether, right? So, yeah, it's a slippery slope. But kind of going back to this idea of making a specific choice, deciding that one timeline of events is better than the other, I can actually kind of explore that in the context of this anime's time travel, or, one method of time travel, or, the type of time travel that is possible. Again, as confirmed some episodes ago, the many worlds interpretation. That's confirmed back in episode 1, actually, right? Multiple timelines, infinite timelines at that, or at least a possibility of infinite timelines based on, certain things changing. Then again, the big question becomes, how exactly do you go about comparing the different timelines, right? Just take like A and B, for example. How do you compare the two in this idea of, deciding that one is better than the other? So in that possible ethical scenario, comparing timelines, you kind of need to observe the deviations, the divergences. So if you try to connect that possible scenario to this story, or the time travel mechanics of Steins Gate, I do have someone rather unique, like I mentioned again a little bit earlier, Okabe Rintaro, whose memory does not get reconstructed, right? As far as I know, he's the only one, as of this point, at least. Maybe there could be others, but for now, it's Okarin, right? He remembers. He's in a position to remember details from a different timeline. So at the least, our Okarin, right, has experienced two different timelines, right? He can kind of compare two different timelines. Even though he's still kind of coming to terms with that whole thing. But yeah, in one timeline, he saw Makise Kurisu. He didn't see her die, but he saw her dead body. And, again, this idea of her getting stabbed to death and all of that, right? And here, she's alive. But see, to me, the next logical question then becomes, okay, this is cool enough, but how about the idea of jumping to different timelines or different world lines, more than just, the two that Okarin has experienced so far? Is that something that this story, this time travel narrative is going to explore, right? Is that even a thing that's possible, right? I'm not even sure. I mean, again, like I said, I firmly believe that that is a time machine that landed on the rooftop and then again crashed or materialized into the side of the building, the radio building, and again, that being Mani Suzuha's method of time travel, the traditional time travel, or the more traditional time travel, I suppose. I suppose I'll find out, the capabilities of that time traveling machine, right? At some point. Is it just time traveling within, that specific or this specific timeline, right? And then again, time traveling in the timeline from the first half of episode 1, or could it get crazier at some point? And they do end up introducing this idea of potentially jumping between timelines, right? And observing different timelines. But again, if that's a thing that the time machine could possibly do, does that really make Ocarina unique anymore? Right? Because Ocarina at this point being the only one that's able to kind of retain memories of the past timeline, right? And not being reconstructed. But if you could just do that anyways through this potential time machine that is on the rooftop, does that kind of diminish this whole idea of, Ocarina having this really rare ability? All of that remains to be seen. And, just the idea of potentially getting answers to some of this stuff, these hypotheticals and, what if scenarios, that excites me really quite a bit. But again, the thing is, I do have someone, I have Ocarina, who is able to remember stuff from another timeline. So is it possible that at some point, Ocarina could be channeling Doctor Strange in the sense that, he might be able to observe many, right? Infinite possibilities, timelines and all of that. And I'm speaking of, Doctor Strange observing infinite, futures and all of that to look for a solution. So could Ocarina be in that kind of position at some point, having this really unique ability or exemption? So now the similarities and the connection to Lost that I made a little bit earlier, that kind of comes into play, this idea of mind travel, right? Now, okay, spoilers ahead. I'm going to speak of Lost and the character that I really want to speak of at this point. So in post, I'll, edit something in and I'll let you know exactly the time to skip to if you do want to skip all this potential talk of Lost, okay? So now I'm about to get into it. Right then, Lost, mind travel, Desmond Hume. Right, this character is one of my all-time favorites, and that happened really early on. I used to watch Lost back in high school around the time it used to air. Right, I missed the first few seasons, but then I caught up, and I was just obsessed. And looking back at it, it's not a surprise, it's not a shocker that I took to Desmond Hume and his storyline, his story arc, and things that he experiences and goes through, that I took to them so much. But yeah, as far as the time travel mechanics of Lost, the mind travel aspect of it is something that feels rather similar to the things that Ocarina kind of goes through, has gone through rather. Again, his memory not being reconstructed, him remembering stuff from another timeline, right? Jumping to different points in time, or different time periods rather. That one is more so of Desmond Hume. I haven't seen Ocarina do something like that just yet. Again, only 5 episodes in. But, that the opening is there. The possibility is there, that through this idea of mind travel, right? Ocarina could be going to a lot of different timelines at some point, right? As they kind of expand on this idea of him retaining his memories. And listen, I hate to say it, but Ocarina could find himself in a similar situation to, again, Doctor Strange, looking for, that one path, that one timeline at some point, that could help him reverse something, right? Catastrophic, perhaps. I've been saying it for a few episodes now. Yeah, it'll get serious at some point, right? Devastating at some point. And, this right here, the calm before the storm, the slice of life stuff, it's to be savored, man. It really should be. But yeah, I'm sure I'll be bringing Desmond Hume and mind travel back in at some point as I learn a bit more about Ocarina's condition, if you will, right? His exemption and all of that. But yeah, ultimately, going back to Suzuha, the consequences of action, the morality of them and all of that, that's quite a bit to think about for an 18-year-old. I mean, that's just so much on the shoulders of an 18-year-old, just to maintain all of that, I mean, yes, it's not a normal 18-year-old, again, she's quite hardened. She had to toughen up, given, this dystopian future she's from, but still, man, you see that it's not easy. It's not easy. She struggles, right? It's isolating. It's deflating. It's depressing. And, it's not easy just kind of maintaining your cover and all of that. She's just lucky that, Ocarine is just so accepting of anyone that might seem a little bit odd because he himself just dabbles in that so much. But then I also have to kind of look at this other possibility, right? The strong possibility actually at this point that, okay, if Amane Suzuha is John Titor, right? Because now it's moved on from her being a time traveler. The next question is she John Titor? If that is the case, a couple of episodes ago, I kind of explored this idea. John Titor responds to Ocarine, right? And tells Ocarine that, it's possible that you remember me from another world line, another timeline, right? And that, I would like to talk or meet you, and sends the email to Ocarine. And Ocarine immediately sends the details of the things that John Titor from the other timeline had to say. So if this is Suzuha, she knows already about Okarine's, ability or exemption from, memory reconstruction. But again, let's kind of go back to episode 1 and the stabbing of Makise Kurisu. And then again, the reaction of Amane Suzuha in the beginning of this episode. To clocking Makise Kurisu in front of her. But yeah, the rooftop landing and, this idea or the possibility that both, the other Ocarine and Suzuha came together, right? That the other Ocarine is already down below and, Suzuha is still on the roof, right? And our Ocarine opens a door, and again, he's being given a signal, kind of like an X, right? Stop right there, or no, this is incorrect, or something along those lines, right? Essentially telling him no, right? To put it simply. So again, if I do believe that's Suzuha up there, is it possible? Is it possible in that timeline, in that world line, she's the one who actually goes down there and stabs Makise Kurisu? In that timeline, is she actually capable of doing that, right? Making that choice. I don't know, man. It's a possibility. But again, you cannot forget about the other Ocarine that's running around, right? And yeah, I mean, that Ocarine has to time travel. So even at the most basic level, this idea of another method of time travel being at play in episode 1, that's really exciting, right? It always has been. I mean, right now, I'm just really incredibly excited about episode 1 all over again, right? I mean, there's always been, a constant level of excitement, but, thinking about it and, dissecting it and analyzing it and theorizing, theory crafting and all of that, using the information I've had since, 5 episodes in now, I feel like it's going to be a constant, isn't it? That I'll always kind of go back to episode 1 and see if, through new context, I can, kind of figure something out or figure a few things out or try to fill in those pieces of the puzzle, right? And, perhaps as I get closer and closer to the conclusion of this episode, I might have a complete picture. I mean, at the most basic level, there's 2 Ocarines running around in that radio building. And that's insane. It's always going to be an insane thought, right? And the other Ocarine, from the future, of course, had to get there. Like I said, had to time travel, right? And in this case, you're looking at traditional time travel because there's 2 Ocarines present. John Titor did say that you can meet yourself, but in doing so, you end up changing, the timeline or the world line. But again, Ocarine is really unique. He's exempt from the, the memory reconstruction and all of that. But, let's not forget that our Ocarine from episode 1 didn't actually see. I mean, I didn't even see the other Ocarine. But, there's clear evidence that there is another Ocarine there. So yeah, let's keep it simple and put it out there. My thoughts on the matter at the moment. At this point, I do believe that is Amane Suzuha on the rooftop. That is a time machine. They call it a satellite. Fair enough. I mean, it's still surprising that there hasn't been any more reports about that. They didn't actually check it out or investigate or anything. Maybe I'll find out. But I do believe that's, the actual traditional time machine, right? And that's facilitating physical time travel, right? Amane Suzuha, she's a physical time traveler. That much has been clear for a couple of episodes now. But I also believe that Ocarine, that other Ocarine, the future Ocarine that is most likely did time travel along Amane Suzuha in that time machine on the rooftop. So yeah, as of this point, based on all the information I have, that's my running, I don't know, understanding of it at the moment, or my running theory. So yeah, at this point, I'm really quite excited to learn about the time machine aspect of it, right? There's a whole goddamn time machine at play that allows traditional physical time travel. But then you can also kind of look at it from another angle for Suzuha, right? That she might be stranded at the moment, that she might not be able to continue her journey, her mission, and all of that. Because again, the time machine is sticking out from the side of the radio building, inoperable from the looks of it. But again, if you look at it from that perspective, it's not the worst time to be stuck in, right? To be stranded in and to be experiencing some of these nice things, right? At least in comparison to her dystopian future. And again, being around people that are of a similar age. But yeah, let's kind of shift the focus once again to the characters. And in this case, I do want to focus on Makise Kurisu. I mean, yeah, it's yet another great episode to gain insight about Makise Kurisu, right? The real Makise Kurisu. So yeah, of course, all of that charming banter continues, the different character dynamics, be it her and Ocarine, her and Daru, and then her and Mayuri. I mean, she's so delicate with Mayuri. I mean, her entire mood just changes immediately anytime she's addressing Mayuri or Mayuri speaks to her, right? She's so delicate. It's lovely to see. And again, if you look at it from Makise's standpoint, and realistically, I suppose, from her standpoint, yeah, to her, it's a little bit odd, right? A little bit baffling that someone like Mayuri does stick around, that does show up. These are her friends. I mean, Makise just straight up ends up asking her about it, right? Are you being forced to be here? Please don't take any more showers and all of that, that it could actually be dangerous for you here. And then, of course, Mayuri breaks out that line, right? I'm Okarine's hostage. I heard that back in episode 1 as well, right? Inside of the shop. But yeah, of course, to Makise, that just sounds like something really serious, right? Immediately gets on the phone. But of course, Mayuri steps in immediately and again, super smiley and tells her, no, I choose to be Okarine's hostage. Now, let me take a I don't know, stab at that. To me, this idea or this running joke of being Okarine's hostage by choice, I think it kind of alludes to or speaks to the relationship that they do have. Again, childhood friends, right? This, possibly this idea of, I'll be always by your side as if I'm a hostage, that's kind of my read on it. And yeah, episodes ago, I described Mayuri as Okarine's constant, right? That's another term from Lost. So yeah, at this point, you can see that Mayuri has really taken to Makise, right? And I feel like, Mayuri has this respect for Makise, right? The type of person she is. And I think that's the case for Makise as well, that she has taken to Mayuri a bit as well, right? Like I said, she's so delicate. And of course, they're not really similar at all, are they? Makise and Mayuri. I mean, I say that, but there's actually even a possibility that she does have similarities with Mayuri and even with the other two. I mean, I've seen that already, but there's some slip-ups here that do kind of give us a bit more on Makise. I mean, just look at this episode, right? She kind of slips up and she finishes a reference for Daru. Listen, man, finishing a reference for Daru is a really specific thing, right? So, that tells us that, of course, Makise Kurisu has much in common with, people like Ocarine and Daru, right? Behind closed doors, I suppose. It's clear that that's the side of her she's not really trying to show to these people. But I do feel that it's only a matter of time before, she's just completely open about the things that she's into, and that they do actually happen to be similar to the things that Daru and Ocarine are into as well. And Mayuri, you can put Mayuri in there as well, right? I mean, let's go back to episode 2, right? The beginning of episode 2. As Ocarine is having his moments, right? Because Makise Kurisu is standing in front of him. And at that point, she said something, right? Daru actually recognized something or clocked something that Makise had to say. And I believe Daru immediately said something like, Louise-chan, FTW. And then again, in the last episode, right? Episode 4, in the alley, it's her and Ocarine, right? And there she also had another moment that felt like a slip up. She immediately just, caught herself after slipping up and just tried to move on. But, just the notion that she is slipping up from time to time, right? And able to finish references and know references that Daru knows as well. And, other things that kind of slip up. It makes it clear to me that she really likes this. She likes being around people her own age, people that know things that she knows. Again, as of this point, it appears that she wants to keep that part of her life separate rather. But, it keeps slipping out. And, soon enough, I'm sure she'll be okay. She'll be comfortable enough to be just open about all of it. But yeah, yes, she's a genius. She's a prodigy at that age, but she's at that age, right? She likes being at that lab. She likes having the lab coat on, right? She likes Dr. Pepper. I mean, she said, "Oh, I did spend 7 years in America." And that's another significant revelation as well here. But her kind of almost trying to play it off as, I don't actually like Dr. Pepper. I just kind of picked up a taste for it, I suppose, because I spent 7 years in America. But to me, it feels like yet another thing that she has in common with Ocarina. And you see that little smirk as he mentioned ramen and the flavors of the ramen, right? Salt and soy sauce. Maybe that's her realizing, there's more in common here, actually. That just like Ocarina and the others, she's more than happy to just enjoy a cup of ramen noodles, right? Simple things, right? So they have so much in common, all of them, especially, Makise and Ocarina as well. Ocarina is just on cloud nine the moment he sees her pull on that lab coat, right? He calls it a uniform, and I called it kind of like a shield. And, given the things I'm beginning to understand about Makise, to me, it also kind of feels like a safety blanket of sorts, right? And also, just from a personal standpoint, from a professional standpoint, it's also a symbol of the things that she's achieved at such an early age. She's proud of it, as she should be. And again, there's always that idea of optics being at play, right? She likes the look of it. She likes being in the lab coat and the things that lab coat represents, much like Ocarina. But yeah, the idea of safety blankets and, masks and personas and all of that, it's quite a common theme. It's a constant, especially for many of these characters, right? Be it Ocarina, be it, again, Makise, be it the glasses girl, be it even Amane Suzuha, right? Trying to keep her cover and all of that. Again, for Ocarina, you've got the persona, mad scientist persona and all of that. And then you see the real Ocarina kind of shine through and crack through from time to time. Of course, you've got Shining Finger, right, who appears to be much more comfortable if it's communication through messaging, and there she can actually really open up, right, to the point that it feels like a totally different person. And then of course you've got Makise Kurisu, who I've been learning more and more about over the span of these past few episodes at this point. There's quite a significant moment that happens here after the match or the game that they're playing. And she completely just destroys Ocarina from the looks of it. Ocarina kind of lashes out. Now, it's not super serious or anything. It's just Ocarina being Ocarina, right? He's been a goof. He's just on about, her not using the right name and all of that, right? Kiyoma. But this performative outburst of his actually got a little too real for someone like Makise. Because, Ocarina is a big guy, right? And he's leaning in, he's banging on the table, flailing his arms around and yelling. He just gets louder and louder and closer to her face, and you see a really specific reaction out of Makise Kurisu. She gets defensive. She goes into defensive mode, right? Puts up her hands, and that's just a really incredibly sad sight, isn't it? It's kind of heartbreaking to see anyone recoil in that manner, just because of the immediate connotations of that. That they've been in that position before. They thought that they have to protect themselves at that point, right? And again, the really sad part is that this is just Ocarina, right? He's not actually trying to hurt Makise, but again, from her perspective, it's this trauma response, much like Suzuha earlier. So yeah, this kind of allows you to build on that idea of quite a fractured relationship with her father, right? But still a relationship that she longs for. And, I'll come back to that in a bit, but, from the looks of it, it's more so than just, a relationship that didn't really quite gel. It's actually something that could have been quite abusive, physically abusive, or abusive enough to the point that, she felt that she has to protect herself in, scenarios that happened. In incidents that happen. And again, that's just assuming that this is all about her father, right? It could be other relationships, right? But she's still quite young. So the possibility of her having multiple partners at this age already, and ones that ended up being that abusive, I think it's a bit unlikely, right? Just given the fact that she's got a fractured relationship with her father, this just kind of goes hand in hand, doesn't it? That, okay, this abusive relationship must have been with her father. So she said that, she spent 7 years in America and that she hasn't seen her father in 7 years, right? So it appears that her and her mom left 7 years ago, right? Around the time she was 11 then, I suppose. And yeah, she's been in America since, right? And there's been no contact. And again, this is a bit of a charming and sweet moment a little bit later on, even though Okurin should have known enough at this point to apologize. But again, sometimes the homie can be quite oblivious, right? Socially inept. And I'll get into that in a second as well, of course, as Makise, calls him out earlier as well. Or not calls him out, just lets him know. How can both you and Mayuri grow up together, right, in the same place, childhood friends and all, but, one of you ends up being so different from the other, so socially inept. And again, he jokes about that being Mayuri. But, going back to Okurin actually caring about Makise enough to, bring up the idea of, okay, maybe you should go back to your hotel room. It's getting kind of late. Maybe you should call your parents. Don't you need to call your parents, right? He thinks about these things. But again, like I kind of explored in the last episode, this is Okabe Rintaro for you. On one hand, he can be rather caring and understanding and sweet and charming and perceptive. But then on the flip side, he can be rather oblivious, right? And such is the case here, right? And this kind of goes hand in hand with, that idea of Makise kind of calling him socially inept. But yeah, you see that he's simply not able to read her body language in that moment. He just continues and he gets closer and closer and gets more aggressive. Again, it's not meant to be anything serious, but from her perspective, it gets scarier and scarier. Right, and he's not able to read it. He's not able to see her defensive body language, and then he's baffled by her tears. And then even after she kind of pretty much explains it, he turns to Daru, who has a complete understanding of it, but Okurin still doesn't. Even then, he's not really able to put it together, or understand it. And for that reason, he's just oblivious to the idea of actually apologizing for this, right? But then again, on the flip side, you go back to last episode, he's not oblivious about her relationship or lack of relationship with her father. And now, there's even more details about it, that she hasn't been in contact in 7 years' time. So, in these types of situations or this type of story, a lot of times there's that common trope of, wanting to reconnect, even against your better judgment, right? There's that common trope of the parent reaching out perhaps, or trying to reach out to reconnect, to reconcile, but ultimately perhaps for ulterior motives, right? Again, that's it's a common thing I've seen a lot. But going back to that idea of against their better judgment, characters that are in that position, and in this case, it's Makise Kurisu, a lot of times, they actually almost delude themselves, or they end up, overlooking past transgressions, and a lot of times some unforgivable transgressions as well. That idea of almost deluding yourself into thinking that you can reconcile and that there could be a semblance of a relationship there. But see, let's kind of try to connect this to this idea of, Suzuha's reaction to Makise, that, Makise ends up doing something unforgivable from the looks of it. If you at least look at it from Suzuha's perspective. I mean, I don't have any specifics, but I do know a time traveler from the future, Suzuha, ends up reacting in that manner just at the sight of Makise Kurisu. So yeah, but yeah, again, that poses the question, doesn't it? Who the hell is her father? And is he about to be a major player, right? Hell, is it a possibility that her father is actually CERN in the future, right? And, okay, let's see if I can speculate a bit. If I try to tie it to Suzuha's reaction to just clocking Makise Kurisu, let's kind of stay on that angle, right? If her father actually is maybe a part of CERN, right? Okay, maybe. Is there a possibility that, building on the point I made about her overlooking past transgressions and all of that, is there actually a possibility here that her father is CERN, right? He is a part of CERN, and he actually brought her into CERN somehow, right? And that automatically makes her public enemy number one in Suzaha's eyes. Ooh, I don't know, man. There could be something there. If the father is a part of CERN, could that explain this, immediate and immense anger towards Makise Kurisu, right? From Suzaha's perspective. But the thing is, that possibility almost immediately kind of falls apart as well, because, Makise doesn't strike me, at least at this point, I can only speak for everything I've experienced. She doesn't strike me like the type that could just, forget everything and go and end up helping CERN. But, once again, kind of going back to time travel story elements and, constants and staples of time travel narratives, there's always constantly this idea of, certain characters not being able to understand the reasoning behind a decision. A lot of times you'll see a character just really frustrated, right, with a future self or with characters from the future, or learning something about the future and thinking, how the hell could they do that? How could they be so different than I initially thought, right? But again, there's a key component missing there: context. Even if it seems crazy, even if it seems like you've been betrayed, even if it seems like you just didn't actually even know the person to begin with, you just didn't have context. But, ultimately, maybe at some point gaining that context, right, it could help you connect the dots, even if they seem impossible to connect at this point. And again, that's a common thing that you see quite a bit in time travel narratives, being baffled by someone's decision making, but then ultimately, finally understanding those decisions at some point after, gaining some context or more context, right? Or significant context. But yeah, to sign off on Makise Kurisu in this episode, listen, prodigy, a genius at that age, but she is at that age and she deserves to be around people her age. She likes to be around people her age. She likes to be around Okarine. And episode by episode, she's learning more about Okarine, right? The different side of Okarine, that is, as well. She likes the banter. She likes being around Mayuri. She just likes being a part of that group. Like I said earlier, it's just a perfect getaway. It's a perfect escape. Actually, one more thing on Makise and, Daru and Okarine. You see, right before they're about to open the report, both Daru and Okarine actually take a moment to discuss the potential connotations of this, the potential risks of, actually looking at this report. It's interesting, isn't it? Because at that moment, you see that Makise is the one who's so eager to just go through and, she's asking them, after doing all of that, you're scared now? I think she said that to Daru specifically as well. As if, come on, let's do this, let's go. So isn't it interesting that she does have that in her, right? That side, that she is drawn to all of this. Even though earlier she tells Okarine, I'm not here to, learn about any potential conspiracies, or I don't care about any of these conspiracy theories that you're going on about CERN. Yet here she is, really quite eager to go through and, read the report. And the other two are the one that are actually, taking a step back and thinking about this. And, here you get to see that side of Okarine again, that he is actually looking at the bigger picture, even though, she tells him a little bit earlier that you lack the ability to see the big picture. Listen, it could be true for some things, but you see that here in this situation, he is able to take a step back, and he is able to see the big picture. Maybe here, it's a unique case of him actually being able to see the big picture because, it could affect Makise Kurisu. It really could affect her future, and he's thinking about her future, right? I made it a point to point out that, even though he's joking around and calling her pervert and all of that, he always maintained, genius girl. There's always that built-in respect and understanding that, this is someone that's special. And he still remembers that even now. And he wants to make sure that, her future is protected, right? As much as he can, at least. At the end of the day, it's up to Makise, right? And she's all in. All of them are all in, essentially. I mean, how could you possibly back out at that point? But, the fact that Okarine actually, makes it a point to ask her to, remove herself from this, because he's looking out for her potential future, you see that it registers. Makise actually has quite a reaction to that. But, another random moment, Daru gets a little bit annoyed about a JPEG, right? Now, I'm not sure if that JPEG is actually meant to be believed to be from before 74, because again, that's not possible, right? Or if Daru is looking at, yeah, it's just kind of tough to know for sure, the context of it. I mean, it feels a little bit out of place, doesn't it? That, there's a little moment, a couple of seconds dedicated to something like that, right? So if, that JPEG is there and it's in a report that's meant to be from before 74, now, even though they actually do speak English and French over there, they still make it a point, right? To kind of highlight that moment, right? They say, oh, it's not in English. Oh, sorry, it's not in French. It's in English. And then, of course, there's a joke about all of her life and her time in America and her being able to speak English. It's been crucial for this moment right here, But again, it is something that they kind of highlight, just like the JPEG. And then finally, this idea of information kind of being out there, right? One of the standout moments in the beginning is Oak Green actually just mentioning the location of the IBN 5100, right? So, at that point, I'm looking at Amane Suzuha's face. I mean, the expression doesn't change because she's already smiling. But, the point is that information is kind of out there, right? Amane Suzuha, it could be a case of, okay, Amane Suzuha already knew this information and, she's kind of like smiling about it. Or, maybe it could be information that she's getting for the first time and now knows, okay, Oak Green finds it at this point in time, in 2010 at that shrine. And that's something that she has to keep in mind, or information that she has to pass on or something. Because listen, if this actually ends up being John Titor, and again, I believe there's a good chance of it, this John Titor's time travel journey might not be complete just yet. Right. And, that kind of almost perfectly goes hand in hand with that idea that, Suzuha might be stranded at the moment, that this isn't actually the end of the line for her. She just can't do anything right now because of that machine being busted and in the side of the building, the radio building. Right. So, again, if this is our John Titor, she still could go back to 75. She could go to 2000. Right. She brings up that she knew an expert once upon a time, or not once upon a time, she just knew an IBN 5100 expert. And I said, that must be her grandpa if this is John Titor, right? Because in real life, the real John Titor, I suppose the hoax, his grandpa was meant to be one of, the key figures in the creation of the IBN 5100. I think I've mentioned this before as well. So, I use a lot of the details from the hoax, the real hoax of John Titor, but again, I'm sure there might be some changes here and there. But, one thing that's been clear for some point now, it's more so than just a reference. John Titor and that hoax, that story, and the details of that story, they are an integral component of this anime, of this story, right? It's a featured character, essentially. I mean, this is such a rabbit hole, isn't it? I mean, you can just go on, and I am going to go on and on as the episodes go on. But for now, I think this is a good ending off point. But yeah, like I said, it's a really strong 5-episode run, opening 5-episode run. And honestly, I think, it might be one of my own stronger 5-episode runs as well for any series, as far as content is concerned. But yeah, if you enjoyed that, consider dropping a like, consider dropping some comments, give me your thoughts, as long as they are spoiler free, of course. Please and thank you. If you are interested in early access or timer-based full length and full opacity, consider checking out the Patreon page and gaining immediate access to multiple episodes. The links are in the description and the pinned comment, also links to social media. Right then, thank you so much for joining me, folks, and thank you for your time, because time is precious. It really is. And I do hope to see you again soon for episode 6. Until then, take it easy.